A hearty and warm welcome to everybody. It's lovely to see you all again. So from right across the world, and it's just lovely to see everybody. And a blessed and happy Easter to our Orthodox brothers and sisters who are celebrating today. So Christ is risen for them as well today. Okay, and with that, over to Father John Paul, who will be introducing us to the topic today.
Christ is risen. He is truly risen. Christos anesti, alitos anesti. So happy Easter again. It's great to be in the Holy Land to celebrate Easter for the second time this year. On behalf of Frederick Masson, Stephanie Saldana, and myself here at Tantur in beautiful Jerusalem overlooking Bethlehem, welcome to week 4 of the Way to Pentecost. Last week, we looked at some of the valleys and some of the depths in areas around the Holy Land. This week, we're going to be looking at some of the hilltops and the mountaintops and the significant resurrectional experiences or pre-resurrection experiences of that, including Mount Carmel, the Mount of Beatitudes, Mount Tabor, Mount Hermon, and Mount Precipice in Nazareth. And our presenter today is Mr. Nizar Haloun. And so Frederick will introduce Nizar again.
Hello to everyone. Hello to everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. So today we have the pleasure to have Nizar Haloun, who is a Christian Palestinian Israeli citizen, a photojournalist, and licensed tour guide. While devoted to Jerusalem, his roots are in Galilee, specializing in the Byzantine and Crusader periods in the Holy Land, and as a soft spot for Christian denominations, liturgies, and world religions. Nizar is one of our guides here at Tantur that is guiding our groups and our continuous education program. And we are very, very blessed to have you with us, to have him with us today. So Nizar, up to you now to make a discovering the hilltops of the Holy Land.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Frederick. Well, we're going to jump right into it. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen, not the present.
You can see my other screen. Okay, so let me stop that and share again. The right screen. Here we go. That's the right screen.
Right.
Okay, so today we'll be talking, as Frederick mentioned, and Father Jean-Paul as well, the mounts in Galilee. So I titled this presentation, Mounts of Transfigurations in the plural form. So when we are talking about the overview of this presentation, we're going to talk about 6 different sites. So it's going to be many visits in half an hour, which is quite impressive. We'll be very, very quick. I mean, in half an hour, but we will be taking some time to visit each site, mainly Mount Carmel, the Deir al-Mihrqa, the monastery of the burning, it's called. We'll right into it in the beginning. And then we'll be visiting Mount Tabor, which is the title of this presentation, with the Church of the Transfiguration. Then we'll be brushing off some sites, depending on how much time do we have. We'll be talking more or less about each site in depth or not. So we'll talk about Mount Arbel, the Mount of Beatitudes, Mount Hermon, and Mount Precipice. So here are the 6 sites that we already mentioned. So we see this is the Sea of Galilee. If you can look at the mouse at my pointer here. The Mount Carmel, the monastery of the burning, is in this area. So you can see the valley, the Jezreel Valley that we'll be talking about later on, Marsh ibn Amir in Arabic, and the monastery is here. Okay, so this is Nazareth. We can see with the map. Just in front of Nazareth, we have a small mount, which is Mount Tabor, that we'll be visiting later on as well. Tiberias, with the Mount of Beatitudes in this area. No, sorry, that's Mount Arbel. And then on top of it, just in front of it, we have Mount of Beatitudes. Okay, Capernaum is in this area. We'll be visiting Capernaum in another session, I think in 2 weeks from now, if I'm not mistaken. And then the last site that we'll be talking about, which is very important as well, a magnificent site, which is really up north the country, is on the foothills of Mount Hermon. It's called Caesarea Philippi. You might know it from the Gospels. A very important and impressive site that will have an aerial image from there as well. I was there last week to take some pictures. So we have aerial pictures of some of the places, which are quite impressive to see them from a top-down view. Okay, so why are we talking about transfigurations with an S? Because, I mean, we have the first meaning of transfiguration, which is Jesus being transfigured and becomes radiant in glory upon a mountain, right? This is the classical definition that we have of transfiguration. But the secondary meanings that we'll be including in this presentation, which is a change, a revelation, and a transformation in some of the sites. When we're talking about those three notions, it will be when someone reveals the identity of the true God through a sacrifice. You'll understand why I'm talking about that in a moment. We'll talk about Jesus reveals his own identity in a way or another, right, for the public. Someone reveals Jesus's identity, right, a third party. And then Jesus inviting us to be transfigured or to be an agent of transfiguration in our daily lives or those of others in different locations in the Gospels. Okay, so each site will be corresponding to one of those definitions that we see here on the screen. So we start with Deir al-Mihrqa. In Arabic, Deir means monastery. Al-Mihrqa is the place of the burning, right? So we saw on the map the Mount Carmel, and the monastery is on this range of the Mount Carmel. We can see the valley of the Jezreel Valley here below, and the Mihrqa is on the hilltop of this range. So here we have a tectonic plate that changes completely the topography of the area from the Jezreel Valley to a very flat valley to mountains. Here we're talking about 500 meters above sea level, which is quite impressive. When you are taking that main road in the Galilee, you can see how impressive the mount is. So the place of the burning, this is a view from the balcony that we'll be seeing later on where it's located towards the east, right? So here we have Elijah already calling us to read the passage from 1 Kings 18, so Elijah's prayer. So we're going to need the passage so you can know to what place this place corresponds in the Old Testament. So this is a passage from the Old Testament, 1 Kings 18. At the time of evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet approached the altar and said. So before I continue, I want to introduce the passage itself, because we're talking at a moment where Elijah is calling the Baal prophets for a competition, right? He tells them, let's see who is praying for the right God. So let's do 2 altars and put on them sacrifices, and both of us will pray. And the person and the group, or the person or the prayer to which God will be answering, it means that this God is the right God, is the true God, right? And here enters Elijah and is talking about the sacrifice. So at the time of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet approached the altar and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all these things at your command. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so that these people will know that you, the Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back again. And then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stone, the dust, and it licked up the water in the trench. So after that, there is a quite bloody and violent passage where the 400 Baal prophets are chased down this valley, the slopes of the Carmel, and they are slaughtered at the foothill. So it's quite violent. So here we have the monastery itself. So you can see you come from this road, from the Druze village. It's a community that is located on the Mount Carmel. Through the woods, there's a small square here, the square of Elijah, where actually the locals on the feast of Elijah, they gather to do barbecue, and they are partying all night, and then you have a mass in the morning celebrating this saint for the Catholics, right? So you go up from here, and then you have the monastery itself and the slopes where the Baal prophets are chased, and then the massacre happens below down there. So you can see it's a quite beautiful area. It's one of the more beautiful areas actually in the Holy Land, where you have a special ecosystem as well, and it is extremely green. So when you're taking the roads to Mount Carmel, it's like you're in Europe somewhere, right? So here you have a view from the east to the west, where you have again the Jezreel Valley and the Carmel Mount and the sea behind it. This here we have images from the sanctuary itself. We have Saint Elijah to the left-hand side, raising his sword made out of fire, and one of the Baal prophets at his feet. And in the square, you have also the facade of the church, where pilgrims that come every year, or used to come and hope will come in the future, they have the possibility to celebrate mass inside this humble church. They can see just below. You have a picture of the church itself, and it belongs to the Carmelite order. And they have a small signal when you enter the church there as well. So, just before we go to the following picture, we have on top of this area, if you follow my mouse right there, you have a balcony where you can climb up and see this view that we saw in the beginning, with the slope of the Carmel Valley and the beautiful Jezreel Valley looking towards the east. So this is we finished our first play. So it's kind of introduction to the most important mount that we're going to visit today, which is Mount Tabor, right? So on Mount Tabor, we know that there was the Transfiguration. I'm going to adjust the text here because we can read it together. Here we go. Well, it's kind of not really. Wait. Okay. So let me read the text introducing the place. We're reading from Matthew 17. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led him up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking to Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud enveloped them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. So on Mount Tabor, as an archaeological site, we have mainly four steps, right? 4 chronological steps that are important to understand the location. This place was important already from the Old Testament. We're talking from the 12th century BC. There was an Israelite battle. It's not that important, but it's good to know that there was a very important Israelite battle mentioned in the Old Testament between the Israelite army and the Canaanite king of Hatzor. Right? We're talking about from the 12th century BC. And later on, as we know from the Byzantine period in the Holy Land, the 4th century is a very important century where many of the important churches were built. So here as well, a very important church was built during the Byzantine century that will last up until the Crusader period, right? In the Crusader period, the Crusaders will arrive and will build a Benedictine monastery, and it will be, the whole area will be destroyed with the arrival of the mighty Sultan Baybars, who was a Mamluk, in the 13th century at the end of the Crusader period, right? And later on, the Franciscans during the Ottoman period will purchase the land and build the basilica that we have here today with the help of the genius of Antonio Barluzzi that we'll talk about in a few seconds. So here we have the ground plan of the basilica, right? We see number 1, the Church of the Transfiguration. Below it, you have the Byzantine period remains. So when you enter the church, you have some windows in the ground where you can look at those remains. But they're not huge windows, but still you can see some of the remains below the church. And when you go outside, you can see some of it's also on the outside. So that's number one, the basilica itself. You have the number two and the number three, the chapel dedicated to Moses when you enter to your left-hand side. To your right-hand side, you have the chapel dedicated to Elijah. And then we have the Byzantine mosaic just before you enter to the judging room, which where the priest will change their habit, right? And outside, you have the remains of the Benedictine monastery built during the Crusader period, and some of the fortifications from the Muslim period. Here's an aerial view of this site that I took last week, especially for this presentation. So we can see the basilica is being currently restored, especially the facade. So we can see all the scaffolding outside. We see the Muslim fortifications that we saw on the ground plan. We see the Benedictine monastery and the church itself. So when you enter the church, you will come from here, and you can see here the part of the Casanova, which is kind of a small hotel of the Franciscans where you can come and actually book a night or two and stay at Mount Tabor. Groups usually don't stay here. It's mainly for retreats if you want to come and disconnect a little bit. Actually, when you go up there, it's real disconnection because you don't have any network. So you're up there and you're disconnected whether you want it or not, right? So yeah, and it's beautifully maintained by a group of young people called Project X, which they are young people being rehabilitated from drug issues, and they're such kind and servile people. I mean, they're extremely really heartwarming, and they take care of the place like as if it was their house, and it's always impeccably maintained, both the garden and the location itself. So when you go up to Mount Tabor, yeah, you go through this winding road. We'll be seeing this on the video later on, so you can see a top-down view, which is also a picture that I took last week. You can see how beautiful the ascension to this place is. And when you go in the sanctuary, you will go by Melchizedek's small church cave, which is a tradition from the Crusader period. And we know Melchizedek from the Old Testament mentioned when Abraham rescues the son of his brother, right, from the area of Dan, and then later on Melchizedek will come with bread and wine and will greet Abraham. So after each year after the Feast of the Transfiguration, the Franciscans the Mass will end, and they will go through a procession and do the final benediction in this church as well. So this is an angle from the west to the east. We can see the Jezreel Valley on the other end, right? So it's a huge valley that extends from the area of Tiberias, more or less, up until the city of Haifa. So you can see again the scaffolding, etc. The Casanova, the small hotel, right? The remains of the Benedictine monastery, and the other elements that we mentioned before as well. And they built here recently, in the couple of years ago, as another area where you can celebrate Mass, because you have some areas when you can celebrate the main church inside, the two chapels, Moses and Elijah here, and then they added a new one here, so it can accommodate more pilgrims that want to celebrate Mass on Mount Tabor, which is very important as well. So here, the Church of the Transfiguration, we see the facade. The construction, as I mentioned before, was built in 1924 by Antonio Barluzzi, the genius of Antonio Barluzzi. It has special status, which is it's a minor basilica, sorry. And a minor basilica, it means that it's a very important church of pilgrimage, right? And has also some special advantages as well. But the main important element is that it's an important church of pilgrimage. The architect we mentioned, Antonio Barluzzi. The architecture, it's from Syro-Roman style. During the excavations, they discovered fragments that belong to the Syro-Roman style, which is the Roman construction, but mainly in the Syrian area. And you can see the details in the facade, which is completely different, and you won't see this in any other structure in the Holy Land, or very few other structures. And you can see how Antonio Barluzzi, the genius of Barluzzi, takes what from the remains, from the geography of the area, from the Gospels as well, and builds the church itself. Right? So we have also we know that the place also belongs to the custody of the Holy Land, which means they're the Franciscans that are in the Holy Land. And the mount's elevation, it's 420 meters above sea level, or 1,400 feet above sea level. So I'm going to ask you a question. You can reply in the chat, maybe for those who'd like. There's a very important element that we see in the facade. We can talk about it later on if you find the right answer or not. But Antonio Barluzzi, again, takes an element from the gospel, from the passages of the gospel, and puts it on the facade. Can you see which one is it? And another answer that will follow, a question that will follow, is why this element is there, and why does this person in the gospel is mentioning the thing that you are looking for actually in the answer. It's a complicated question, but the main question is how Barluzzi takes an element from the passage and replicates it on the facade, and then we'll continue from there. Okay, so next slide. So you can reply in the chat. So we go into the church, we're going into the main door of the church. To the left hand side, we have the chapel of Moses. Right, you can see Moses carrying the tablet. And to the right hand side, we have the chapel of Elijah. We already talked about Elijah and the sacrifice. Right, you can see the two altars, and Elijah raising his hands and praying. And you can see how God sends the fire and consumes the altar of Elijah where he prayed, and the other one remains intact. And in both of those chapels, when you come to visit, you can celebrate Mass if you are a small group, right? There are two tiny rooms where you can celebrate Mass. So you enter the church. We have the main app, the central apps. We can see again inside it's the Syro-Roman style. We have two floors. The upper area is where the solemn Mass is celebrated on the 6th of August every year. And below it, you have the crypt, where if you are a big group, you can celebrate the Mass as well. We can see the picture just above, as zoomed in picture of the area. You can see the crypt with also another altar, and you can access the upper altar from both sides, from here and from here as well. The main mosaic in this basilica is, of course, the Transfiguration itself. Right, we have the three disciples here on either sides, and we have the apparition of Moses and Elijah. In the middle, we have Jesus. So the mosaic is quite impressive as well. And again, Barluzzi, when he's thinking about the construction and the interior of the basilica, he's trying to maximize as much as he can from what he has around him, and that's what he does everywhere where he built a church in the Holy Land, right? So we have the golden tesserae all around the figures, right here. So in the afternoon, actually, when the sun set comes from the west, the sun hits the golden tesserae below the feet of Jesus. So all the area is completely, bright, and it's not only bright, it's a warm light as well. So it's really impressive. If you have the opportunity to visit the church in the afternoons or just before they close, it is quite impressive. So that's why I recommend, if you're coming on your own to the Holy Land and you have the opportunity to take 1 or 2 days off at Mount Tabor as a retreat, definitely it's a sight to see, and it's quite impressive to see how Antonio Barluzzi also thought of every single detail. So if we talk about details again, in the beginning of the architecture, when Barluzzi wanted to build the church, the roof was meant to be in a very special stone that is transparent, right? But unfortunately, due to technical reasons, the project was not able to be accomplished as they planned in the beginning, so they opted for a classical roofing. But the idea in the beginning, Barluzzi's idea, was to have a transparent or a roof that would let as much light in as possible, right? Again, for the effect of the Transfiguration, which is quite impressive as well. So in the crypt, we have other mosaics. One of them we can see here just below the image of the crypt with Jesus, right, and with the angels. And again, here we have a zoomed in image of the mosaic of Christ being transfigured. So the feast is on the 6th of August, as I mentioned. So after the end of the Mass, the friars and those who attend the Mass will leave in a procession towards Melchizedek's church slash cave, and there they will have the last benediction after the feast. So here again, it's an image from the east to the west. You can see how impressive the mount is, and actually there are hikes they can do. There's actually one hike from the area where the buses are, and you can climb up towards Mount Tabor. It's about an hour. It's quite steep, so if you're in good shape and you like adventure, it's a very good hike to do, and you have nice panorama stops that you can do there as well. So we're gonna play the video of the area. I'm gonna comment on it. So here we go. So this is the Gate of the Winds, which is replicated from the Crusader period and is built in the Crusader style period. Here, where my mouse is if you can see, this is Melchizedek's tomb, not tomb, sorry, cave slash church. Here, where the buses are entered, they go here and stop for the pilgrims, so they can walk to the Church of the Transfiguration. So you'll be walking a very narrow road. To the left-hand side of the church, you have another Orthodox church as well of the Transfiguration. Here we have the Casanova that we mentioned, the small hotel, the Benedictine Crusader period remains, and the basilica that is being restored. And here, a beautiful view of the Jezreel Valley or Marj ibn Haber. So we are going here from the other side to the area of the west. You can see the remains of the Arab Muslim period as well. The church that they recently built, the small chapel. And here we have the Greek Orthodox Church of the Transfiguration, which is separated by a wall. Here we have the monastery of the Franciscans. You can see how dense this place is, and you have a very typical tree. It's called the Mt Tabor tree, Mt Tabor oak tree. But that's another ecology themed presentation that we can make later on, but it's quite specific. And here we have the outer parking, right? So I was filming from here. This is my car. And this is the gate of the wind that we talked about, Bab al-Hawa in Arabic. And you can see how impressive the panorama is from here. I'm sorry for those who have seasickness. It's a bit tricky. And you have the very interesting angle of the winding road coming up or coming down towards the lower villages. So again, we're talking about 500 feet. 500 meters or 1,400 feet. So it's quite impressive view from up there. So let's go back to our presentation. I hope, where is it? Here we are. Okay. So another place that is that could be the Mount of Transfiguration, because scientifically speaking, we are not 100% sure that the Mount of Transfiguration is the mount that we have today. Of course, it dates from the Byzantine period, but in the passage of the Gospel, we're talking about they went into a high place, right? So why are they doubting if Tabor is or isn't? It's not exactly a problem. We'll talk about why it's not a problem later on. The main reason is that the passage before the Transfiguration, one of the passages, is Peter's confession, right? Where he says that when Jesus asks him, we're going to see that later on, Jesus asks his disciples, who do you think I am? And they answer, and Peter answers that he is the Son of God, right? So, and where are they located? In Caesarea Philippi, right? This is the last location that we'll visit later on. So it's really up north. It's by Mount Hermon. So it could be or could not be. We're not 100% sure that if that other place, Caesarea Philippi, is the place, or Mount Tabor, or other mounts in the area. But if we talk about the tradition, again, I mentioned one of this elements in in a previous presentation that the importance of tradition is not to be 100% sure if the place is there or not, but the tradition is when an element is passed from a generation to another. All right, we're celebrating an event that took place in an area that is pretty small. Right, we're talking about the Holy Land. It's not the United States or or China. It's pretty small, and some aspects are not a GPS location. So just for a scientific accuracy, Mount Arbel could be one of the locations. We can see it's already also a huge mountain there. It's quite impressive. We can see the Sea of Galilee right here below, and Mount Arbel, which is not far away from Mount Tabor as well. So it's a conjecture. It could be or could not be one of the places as well. We have also Mount of Beatitudes. That also is a small mount, right? It's less considered as an option of the Transfiguration, but still is, because it's still a mount, and it's also nearby, and he was in the area, of course, very often, because Capernaum is 2 minutes from there. But what is important on Mount of Beatitudes, if we take Matthew 5, I'm not going to read it. You can look at it by yourself if you want. We're talking about the Beatitudes, right? So we're talking about a transfiguration, but of a different kind, right? Jesus is in a geographical location that is very sensitive, right? It's a speech of a revolution, because when you read the passage of the Beatitudes, you can read it in a very nice, pink, easy, and soft way, right? Or if you take yourself and put yourself in the period and in the period of detention where Jesus was living, and in the geographical locations where Jesus was, because the Beatitudes is also 2 minutes away from Tiberias, which is a Roman city. He is giving quite a speech of a revolution, right? He's asking of us to change everything from our personal lives to the way that we treat others, and how the way that we see also our afterlife as well. So, and it's not a criticism, but still those are very tough words directed to the normal people, the people that have power, and the people that are also at the head of the churches in the future, but also the people that are head of the synagogues back then. So it's quite an aggressive speech, a very impressive, aggressive meaning very impressive, a speech that was taking back then. And we are talking about a revolution, right? A revolution, a transfiguration from within and without. So that's why the Beatitudes is one of the conjecture of the Transfiguration that we mentioned before, but it's also a transfiguration of another kind, the one that we are looking at and that we reflect on every single day as Christians, right? So here we have 2 dimensions that are extremely important. The place is a beautiful location, the Beatitudes. Of course, when you come and visit the Holy Land, it's one of the must stops. And the sisters there, the Iraqi sisters, are beautiful, and they welcome you all the time with open hands. So this is only an add up, let's say, to the beautiful garden and location that you're in for a treat for. So this is our 4th location. So let's move to our following location. The one that we mentioned before, right? Mount Hermon. On the foot of Mount Hermon, we have Caesarea Philippi, right? Caesarea Philippi is also quite impressive place that is mentioned in Matthew 16, and also in other Gospels as well, where Jesus goes there with his disciples and asks them, right? Who do you think I am? Here we have also, again, the 2 dimensions, the dimension of a conjecture, where the Transfiguration would have taken place because they were here before, and then later on, just moments later, there is the Transfiguration. So it could have happened here or on Mount Tabor. So this is the first dimension. The second dimension is the one, again, of a transfiguration, of a revelation of a disciple to Jesus, right? He asks, who do you think I am? And Peter says that you're the Son of God. And again, we take the same geographical and location and political situation and state that they were in back in the days. You have to imagine that there were huge temples in this area dedicated to many gods. So here we have the grotto of Pan, where they used to make sacrifices, and there was water coming from the area from the up top to below, and then the water would leave from this area and go outside. And you can see here again, you have the water from Mount Hermon. and the whole area here was actually bloody because there were sacrifices all the time, sacrifices of sheep and mainly of sheep. So Jesus came here to a very sensitive location, and he's asking, "Who do you think I am?" Right? It's quite daring. I mean, it's not something that anyone can do. Right? He's declaring himself to be God in a place where other people are worshiping other gods. So it's a complete revolution. I mean, it's also a quite daring thing to do back in the days. And we're talking about a very big city, right? Today, there's almost nothing left there, besides the archaeological remains, which are beautiful. And I highly recommend that you visit. But it's, again, a highly daring thing to do back in the day. So again, we have the two dimensions, the conjecture and the place where you have a personal transfiguration, a revelation of a disciple towards Jesus. And our sixth location is Mount Precipice. Mount Precipice, again, is mentioned in Luke 4 when Jesus is in the synagogue in Nazareth. And he stands up and he reads a passage. I invite you to read the passage later on when you have the time and to reflect on it. And there he's revealing himself through the scriptures of himself being God, right? Because he says that the scriptures have been fulfilled today, and the crowd back then, which weren't ready for the message, will take him to this area and wanted to throw him from the sail below to the area of the Jezreel Valley. So in this area is the Mount Precipice. So it's a park open 24 hours. So it doesn't belong to anyone, right? And we have just in front of Mount Precipice a mount that we visited moments before, which is Mount Tabor, right? So we see the winding road, the villages below this winding road, and the churches of Transfiguration, the Orthodox and the Catholic, up on top of that area. And around it, of course, it's the Jezreel Valley that continues to the east and to the west. And that's it. Thank you. If you have any questions, and if you have the answers as well, let me see it and check the chat for the answer that of my question. That would be awesome as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nizar. And what a gift to be able to travel with you and your drone over this beautiful country.
Welcome anytime, Petra.
So a couple of answers that I can maybe read in response to your question of how, what, and why on the facade of the Basilica of the Transfiguration. A couple of ideas was the 3 tents, the clay tablets.
Excellent.
Of the
That's the right answer. Yep.
Which one was that?
Yeah. The 3 tents. And why are we talking about the 3 tents? It's because during that time, it was the famous Feast of Sukkot, right? The Feast of the Tents. So if you think about it without the context of the time, right, it would be weird. I mean, why would they suggest let's build spontaneously 3 tents? It would be completely weird. But if you think about it, back then it was the feast of the tents, of the tabernacles, and that's why the first thing that they suggest is let's build 3 tents, right? Where Moses, Elijah, and Jesus in the middle, and we see the reflection of that in Barluzzi's architecture on Mount Tabor.
Wonderful. I'm just waiting for a couple more questions. I think people are still amazed and in awe of the wonderful sights that you've shown us. Hey, not seeing it. Why is the location of Mount Tabor not certain?
It's not certain because when we talk about the passage of the gospel, they are what we see there is they went into a high place, right? So we don't know exactly where this place is, but they during the Byzantine period, that they decided that the place would be we would commemorate basically this event on Mount Tabor, but there were several options, and this is one of them, and they opted for Mount Tabor. But we have the option of also Arbel, the Beatitudes of Caesarea Philippi, And many people also choose to do an alternative pilgrimage and sometimes shift those places where you can move those events. If you can, why not? I mean, it's also, you can see, for instance, in Jerusalem, not everyone does the typical way of the cross, right? They would choose other routes, because throughout the history, you also had other routes for the way of the cross.
Mhm.
So it's not less valid. But some people choose to go with the traditional option, which is Mount Tabor, or the traditional way of the cross, and other sites as well.
Okay. Super, thank you. Another question coming in. How are the archaeological and religious researchers organized among the various religions involved in the history of these places?
Can you repeat the question again, please?
How are the archaeological and religious researchers organized amongst the various religions involved in the history of the place? So I think the questions like on the Mount of Transfiguration,
Mhm.
you mentioned that was the Greek and the Catholics. So how do they organize all those archaeological?
Oh, I mean, as a practical visit, how do they visit the top of the mountain, let's say?
No, how do they decide most probably how to go and do some archaeological research there?
I mean, when an archaeological site is being dug, it depends on where it is being dug first. If we're talking about a Franciscan place under the custody of the Franciscans of the Holy Land, typically the site is dug by the Franciscans. The Franciscans have archaeologists that are friars, or have people working for them that are from the custody, and they dig from within this institution. But if it's an open place like a national park, it will be the Israeli authority. And then there they go through a specific process of choosing which university will do it, right? Because in the archaeological digs, you have different schools, as you know, people might know. You have the maximalist view, which believe that everything that is written in the Bible is 100% historical, and they dig using only the Bible, right? And the minimalists, on the other hand, from the Tel Aviv University, for instance, will say that, okay, the Bible is a tool, but we'll use it as a way to help us, but not as a guiding flag, let's say, right? So they might shift dates. Like one of the major figures of the minimalist view is Israel Finkelstein, right? So it depends. If it's a national park, it's a land that belongs to the state, it will go through the AAI, which is the archaeological authority, the Israeli archaeological authority. Or if it's a religious site, Orthodox or Catholic, it will go to their respective churches, and they will decide what they will do with it, right? But from Mount Tabor, you have two sites. You have the Catholic, that's led by the Franciscans, and they did their own archaeological research, and they were one of the first, actually, just even before the establishment of the state of Israel in 1948. Even during the Ottoman period, they did all their archaeological digs, etc. And the Orthodox is the same. They were here also before, and they did their own archaeology, though the archaeology for the Orthodox is less important than for the Western Church, let's say, right? So they are there. They don't emphasize on it. If it's there, they show it. If it's not, the tradition behind it is more important, let's say.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nizar. So lots of appreciation coming in.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and lots of people saying it was fascinating, wonderful, blessing, all those wonderful.
Thank you all.
There was just one maybe other question, which was, on Mount, I think it's a quick one, that on Mount Beatitudes, there was a beautiful purple tree. Do you know what the name of that tree is?
No, I don't. I'll look it up and let you know. It is beautiful indeed, yes. It's on the parking lot, that's true. And every time all the pilgrims would step back and take a picture with this tree and the Sea of Galilee behind it. So it's quite a famous celebrity tree. I will look it up and let you know.
Okay, super. And I think that's a good point then to hand over to Father John Paul and Stephanie for our reflection on those transfigurations. But again, a wonderful presentation, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Nizar. It was great to revisit all of those places again. I do have one question for you too, and it's that It says in Matthew's gospel that as Jesus and Peter, James, and John came down after the transfiguration, they entered into a village. I don't know if that village would still exist. Might that help also identify where Mount Tabor might have been? I mean, where the transfiguration might have been?
Do we have the name of the village, or is it only mentioned that it was a village?
It just mentioned that a group of people from a village approached Jesus.
Back in Jesus' time, the area of the Mount Tabor was quite empty. On top of the Mount Tabor, there was a Hasmonean fortress, and it would have, I mean, before Jesus' time, and even we suspect that also it was there during Jesus' time. So, and in the Jezreel valleys it was quite empty. So that's also one of the things that would shift the attention to other locations, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, because we have many discoveries that are happening every single year, and we think that we are sure of something, and then the following year we have completely different theories. So that's what tradition is important, because we are celebrating an event. That's the most important thing. But yeah, even if we knew the name of the village, it's quite difficult still, because when we talk about Bethsaida, for instance, right? We discovered only last year 2 Bethsaidas in 2 different locations. So let's try to figure out which one it is, right? It's always, there's this game, and it's very interesting for tour guides and archaeologists, right? Because it gives us all the time more things to for our soul and for our minds to think about. So even if we know the name, we knew the name of the place, it still wouldn't give us 100% certainty where this place is.
Okay, good. Thank you.
A pleasure.
In looking at the Transfiguration, and especially this icon of the Transfiguration, all of the elements of the biblical account are there. You know, in the middle section, you can see Jesus leading Peter and James and John going up the mountain. And then on the right side, you see them coming down the hill, the mountain, where he's explaining to them what they experienced. Obviously, you see Moses and Elijah with Jesus at the top. And at the bottom, you can see that because of the bright light, they have hidden their faces or have fallen to the ground. And so what I find interesting in terms of just looking at some of the heights and Transfiguration experience is in many ways a resurrectional experience as well. It's an incredible experience because Peter is just blown away by this event. What he proclaims, Lord, it's good for us to be here. It's so good to be here that we really want to stay. And so we're going to build these tents, one for you, one for Elijah, and one for Moses. And then it's shortly after that this bright cloud, very much like the cloud that surrounded Moses on Mount Sinai, appears. And the voice, this is my beloved son, listen to him. And they fall to the ground out of fear. They're very frightened. And the next thing you know, Jesus is there saying, get up, rise, don't be afraid. So it's an experience that really shakes them up, that really stays with them at that particular moment, that was probably also very disturbing. The conversation on the way down the hill, Jesus is explaining to them kind of what's happened. What have Moses and the prophets had to say about the coming of the Messiah? But what I find striking in this particular gospel passage is to listen to him. Don't just hear him, but listen to him. Because Peter's reaction is just to be so wowed by the experience. It's almost like he's just saying, far out, we want to stay here. It's good to be here. But the voice is saying, listen to him, not what is most immediate within you. And so I think that gives rise to a couple of questions. As Peter, James, and John witness all of this, I don't think that what they experienced is atypical of what many of us can experience at different flash moments in prayer. And so a couple questions. What have been your transfiguration moments? And how did they stay with you? What I also find interesting in this transfiguration experience is that they didn't stay up on top. They couldn't stay on top. They had to return down below. And again, I'm struck by the mountaintop, but also the valleys that Jared had talked about in the past. And in that gospel passage of Matthew, it talks about Jesus explaining stuff to Peter, James, and John as they're going back down the hill. But once they arrive, they enter back into a chaos. And so we too have these transfiguration moments, these glimpses or insights that grab onto us, but they don't always necessarily stay. We can tend to forget about them. Most of us want that mountaintop experience, though. Paul had this same experience. Moses had this experience. Elijah had this experience. But what we end up with is a glimpse of something, brief moments that give great consolations. And yet most of our days are really spent back down in the valley, that Jezreel Valley that Nizar showed us, a beautiful valley. But it is still down below. And most of our days are spent down below. Jesus and the three re-enter into a certain chaos that is down below because they immediately are met once they get to the bottom of the mountain by a man with a son who seems to be possessed. And there's this big tumult that's going on because the man says to Jesus, can you do something because your disciples were not able to? And in many ways, the transfiguration moment is lost in that chaos for Peter, James, and John. I'm sure that they probably also questioned, did it really happen? Was it just a figment of my imagination? Because it just seems so far removed from the mess that they now find themselves in. Another way of my really taking all of this in, I had a spiritual director once who, in sharing some of these transfiguration moments, I talked about how they were really incredible moments or insights. And yet they didn't always stay. And so his way of explaining that to me was that kind of some of these real highlights in prayer are very intense moments. And so he had to remind me that the intensity is not always there, but the intimacy is always there. And our tendency is to always feel that if somehow the intensity of prayer is not there, then we can really kind of doubt the intimacy is there. And for me, I want that intensity all the time. And I feel lost when I don't experience it all the time. But the reality, as my spiritual director told me, is it's not really sustainable. However, what has really stayed with me is the fact we're meant to live with that mountaintop resurrectional experience. There's a clarity of vision that happens in these little brief moments of insight, these transfiguration moments. And if we really embrace those brief moments, and however brief they might be, they're still real moments that really lift us up, that give us an insight into the depths of the resurrection of Jesus. Those are meant to be the moments that really keep a deep inmost calm within me. And so that's the clarity of vision. That's part of the transfiguration. How do I let my transfiguration experiences then be transfigurational experiences for other people as well? And I think that was a great way that Nizar presented all of this, that, you know, a transfiguration experience is meant to be something that we take in, but something that we also radiate out to others. So all of this leads to the next icon that I wish to share with you. It's an icon that I think really captures a lot about what I'm talking about in terms of how do I continue to live a transfigurational experience or one of these resurrection experiences. This icon by Brother Mickey McGrath is entitled, "No Storm Can Shake My Inmost Calm." And obviously it's Jesus in the boat on the stormy sea. And you see the storm clouds at the top of the icon, and you see the swirling seas down below. You see the disciples very caught up and concerned about the fact we're sinking. Lord, don't you have any concern about us who are about ready to drown? One of my favorite characters is in the middle on the right side. A guy who seasickness is part of his experience. But what I find striking about this is Jesus who has that inmost calm. Jesus living his intimacy with God that keeps him calm so that he doesn't get caught up with the chaos, much like Peter, James, and John got caught up in the chaos around coming down and encountering this group of people with the son that they were not able to cure. But it's meant to be that transfiguration moment that really stays with us, that we live continually. And so therefore it helps us to deal with the chaos around us and not get caught up with it. So even in these moments where we might lose track and we might feel a sense of fear or doubt or mistrust, or just say, you know, it was a figment of my imagination because it just doesn't stay with me unless I take the time to remember it. But still in the midst of all of that, something is happening. I need to trust that. And so a final question on my part is, what is the resurrection or transfigurational moment that stays with you? And when does this or these moments reappear? Be attentive to that because it's saying something to us.
I have a favorite mountain story. I was visiting Iraq a few years ago. I was in a village called Al-Kosh, which had a large Jewish population. And there's the tomb of the prophet Nahum. And every Shavuot, which is coming up in a few weeks, Jews used to go and visit the tomb of Nabi Nahum, and then they would go to a mountain behind it. What mountain? I was told. They said, oh, that's Mount Sinai. And I said, how is it possible that's Mount Sinai? Mount Sinai is not in Iraq. Mount Sinai is in Egypt. But every year they would go there and they would receive the 10 Commandments. And what I understood was this ancient Jewish community, which some, say goes back as far as the Babylonian exile, that when they came to Iraq, they brought the mountain with them. In the same way that early Christian pilgrims, you might know, went and did the Via Dolorosa, and they loved it so much that they brought the Stations of the Cross back with them, which you may be familiar with from your home churches. When we love a place and experience holiness in a place, it becomes part of the landscape of our hearts, and we carry it with us wherever we go. So when Father JP and I were planning this, I remembered that I had this icon of the Transfiguration, which you see up there, and I said, oh, I'll just bring it with me. And this idea of bringing the Transfiguration with me really captured me. So what I want to talk just briefly about is how do we bring our transfigurations with us? In the text, Jesus is transfigured in front of the disciples. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. And of course, the disciples went to build a shelter. They feel that they've reached the summit, both of the mountain and of their own spiritual experience, and they want to stay there. And when they can't and they have to go back down the mountain, as we see, they quickly enter into the mess. It must have been very hard to hold on to hope. And as Father JP mentioned, they might have wondered whether it really happened. And we're the same way. As Father James Martin wrote in his recent book on prayer, often at the end of a retreat, I'll tell people, you will inevitably doubt even those things you have come to see as authentic. He suggests that we write them down so we can remind ourselves, yes, this really did happen. We try to remember. We write experiences into our notebooks and into our hearts. And we hope that when we experience difficulty, we can learn to remember those moments in our lives in which we felt Jesus deeply and fully present, trusting that we carry him with us, that we take the mountain with us. We bring the Transfiguration with us so that we can return to the mountaintop whenever we need it and savor it. It's imprinted in our hearts. So today, a question for you to reflect on. Maybe take some time to look back on your life and reflect on a transfiguration moment, a moment in which you felt God revealed in a special way, a moment in which you felt taken in by God's love. Every single one of us will have a different and unique moment, a moment when we experience God's love communicated to us, in which we felt in our core, it is good for us to be here. Today, spend some time with that, drink from it, and realize, yes, this really did happen. Listen. How is God revealing God's self to you? We remember. We turn back in wonder and gratitude so that we can bring them with us. Not out of nostalgia, not to remember that God was with us, but to drink in that moment so that we might realize that that same God is still with us, that God is always with us. Our faith is one of remembering. When we pray the Our Father, we're praying the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray. We are the very ones Jesus is teaching to pray. When we have the Eucharist, we are the very ones to whom Jesus is saying, do this in memory of me. As my friend George, who spoke to you about the Holy Light, said to me once, for us, everything is now. So return to those moments when you felt God's presence to bring them into your now, to know that that realness, that transfiguration is as true then as it is today. God is here. God is now. Because God has never left you for a single moment. And once we remember that, then we're able to see God again in the smile of a child, in the beauty of a flower, in the kindness of strangers, here and now. And we can say thank you. So listen and keep listening. Because with that strength, we can, as Nizar so beautifully said, take it in order to be agents of transfiguration in the world. So we give thanks. It is good for us to be here.
Amen. Thank you very much, Father John Paul and Stephanie, for that beautiful reflection. I think I'm not going to add much more to that because I think that's a beautiful ending. It's been a wonderful transfiguration up the mountain. Let us just take that mountain with us, as Stephanie mentioned, into our week. And with that, I want to thank everybody for joining, for being the mountain perhaps in each other's lives as well, each one of us here today. Thank you for that. And then we'll see you next week, hopefully, where Nizar will be going with us to the Sea of Galilee, or the Lake of Tiberias, as it's also called. So wishing you all a blessed and good week, and look forward to seeing you all again next week. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. God bless.
Christ is risen.
Hallelujah. Bye.